Good morning, good morning, good morning. We're here with another edition of the Board Watch. I'm joined, as usual, by my colleague, Hassan Barnes. Hassan, why don't you greet the citizens of Baltimore and beyond this morning?
Good. We beyond Baltimore. Good morning, guys. I'm Hassan Barnes. As usual, we're back here with another episode of Board Watch, and let's jump into it.
All right. Well, Hassan's got a bunch of things he wants to talk about, but before then, I'm going to ask your help with something. Number one, let me remind you that if you have a message for us, please use the chat window to convey your messages or questions. Number two, as always, I want to remind you that the Baltimore City Board of Estimates meets bi-weekly. There was a meeting last week that we've already covered the agenda of, but when the board meets, I encourage you to witness it either on Charm TV, I think it's called, or tune in on WebEx, or I think it may be available also after occurrence on YouTube. Now, having said that, I need your help. As you know, the whole world, particularly the United States and Maryland, have been affected by the reductions in staff at various federal agencies, including the agencies that have been essentially closed, and also have been affected most desperately, almost, by the delay, cutoff, or slowdown in some way of federal funds coming into Maryland and also to the city of Baltimore. Almost all of those employment reductions and funding delays or eliminations have resulted from the actions of the so-called Department of Government Efficiency, led by Elon Musk and his band of musketeers. So here's what I need your help with. I wanted to find out, and let me mention one of Trump's biggest issues has been, of course, immigration and the so-called invasion of illegal immigrants. Well, being aware of the fact that Mr. Musk was born in Pretoria, South Africa, it seemed that I wanted to inquire as to the nature and extent of his U.S. citizenship. Here's what I found, and then I'm going to ask you for your help. What I found is that Mr. Musk came to this country on a student visa to attend Stanford University. However, from the records that I've seen, he left Stanford University after only 2 days, but somehow remained in this country continuously up until the time when he received a so-called green card, a permanent residence card. And apparently, from what I've seen, he was able to somehow get a permanent residency card, even though he was already in violation, it appears, of his student visa admission, without ever even having to leave the country and come back. I also was trying to find information as to when Mr. Musk was naturalized as a U.S. citizenship. He holds citizenship in Canada, where by virtue of his Canadian mother, he holds citizenship in South Africa by virtue of having been born there, and we're told that he holds citizenship in the United States by virtue of naturalization. Now, in order to be a naturalized citizen of the United States, I believe you have to have, one, been issued a permanent residency card, a green card, and you must have been a permanent resident for at least 5 years. And that assumes that you were in the country initially lawfully. So, but that's the extent of the information that I've been able to find. It would be, the question ultimately, is Mr. Musk really a United States citizen, which would be, and if it turns out that he's not, you can imagine the fallout from that. So my question to you in the audience, particularly those familiar with immigration laws, and by no means am I conversant in that area or an expert, help us, if you will, or help me to further investigate that matter and see if you can find any additional information beyond that I've been able to find. Now, Hassan, what's happening that you think we ought to talk about?
Well, I want to go back to the point you made based on the president's position for immigration. The reality is his administration have people in it who have adverse positions. Pam Bondi and the new FBI director won't see eye to eye. They haven't seen eye to eye so far. There's many people in his administration who are for immigration, many are against it. They also against DEI, although it's been a question as to whether they was qualified for the actual jobs in the first place. So being contrary isn't new for this administration. I think we'll see as we go along. Whether or not Elon Musk is a U.S. citizen, I don't think the president cares. I don't think the base cares. I think Doge is moving along. I think the goal for Doge has been to show the people we can be fiscally responsible. We can cut back on spending. My question is, even savings from the government and firing people, we spend more money in other countries than are reasonable. Whether it's Ukraine, whether it's Israel, we spend billions and billions of dollars on defense funding for other countries. I'm certain that's much more money than we actually spend on government employees. The small amount of savings we have in firing people isn't worth the juice isn't worth the squeeze. We literally have a situation where we're cutting down workforce. Well, what happens when you cut down workforce? You cut down revenue in the community, right? So if you fire people, they can't go buy things. They don't have the ability to pay their mortgage. They can't pay their car note. It stifles development of the economy in a way that I don't think the administration cares about. I'm not opposed to telling the American people, hey, we went too far out. We got to bring things back. Let's pull back some, but do it in a much more open way. I don't think it makes sense to do it in the way where you're firing federal employees. And they're firing people in ways that don't make sense. I heard a story this morning, I believe it was on CNN, where the airplane that dropped atomic bombs on Japan, the name of the airplane includes the word "gay" in the name. Now, allegedly, the military deleted the pictures of the plane because it has the word "gay" in it. I'm sure if that's true, it's by mistake. But those kind of things have happened since we've had Doge come in. The same way they went and they started firing people who were responsible for our nuclear arsenal, not knowing that, hey, maybe we shouldn't fire them. Maybe they actually should be in place. They're doing things almost haphazardly in a way to be effective. And I haven't seen any real numbers showing the outcome. We've seen those put numbers out and then pull them back, put numbers out and pull them back. They haven't really made an impact, but making people terrified for their jobs. So the desire to go out there and do things as the administration has done, their strategy for me, and someone may tell me I'm wrong, has seemed to be do as much as possible, like shock and awe. Throw everything out there at one time and we'll see what sticks. And most things aren't sticking, but people still are nervous. I was at an event recently where a federal employee came to me asking me for help about them losing their job. Well, I don't do employment law, one. And they haven't been fired yet, but they were certain they would get fired soon. So as we go along through the board watching, we have conversation about the administration. It may not be a straight line. It may be a conversation up and down because the administration hasn't done things in a way that's been interesting, in a way that's been clear and has been interesting. But as you know, Bob, in the media, we've seen Zelensky on the news more than ever. He's been on the news since his role with Trump in the Oval Office. That has led to a clear departure in American foreign policy. The U.S. government basically is taking a step back from the European partners, and Europe is taking notice. Whether it's real notice, I don't know. I mean, certainly the Europeans are looking towards beefing up their defense spending. But when they say that, we still spend much more money than they do on defense. And they say that almost as if like a reflex. I still think their European partners, whether it's Germany, whether it's Britain, will depend on the U.S. substantially for support and aid. But what it means is we are exercising our power in a way that I don't think the American people really want to do. I think most Americans don't necessarily support the war in Ukraine, but I don't think they have an interest in going back and forth and protecting Europe and going back and forth and negotiating deals with Zelensky or otherwise. We have a mineral deal on the table that most Americans have no idea what it is, or what it means, and what's the benefit of it. So that part I think is interesting. We hear about Zelensky and the deal, but most Americans don't know why it's important, why the government are looking to do a deal with Ukraine for their minerals and why it's so important.
Well, and sooner or later that will come out. But I would say if you want to get a full view of the financial impact of the decisions that have been made thus far by the federal government, the financial impact on the state of Maryland, the state comptroller Brooke Learman gave an address a few days ago with an assessment of the financial condition of the state, and where she describes, and her remarks are available on YouTube, I believe. but you'll find that in her remarks, she indicates how the devastating impact that the loss of the federal support for Maryland, not just including the thousands of federal workers who are residents of Maryland, not just in Prince George's County, by the way, but also in Frederick, Maryland, and the other counties, the tremendous impact of that on the Maryland economy. But I don't want to lose sight of the question, again, I need help with this. Is Elon Musk an illegal alien or a U.S. citizen? That's the question, because it would be the height of absurdity if, in fact, the individual who's in charge of all of these devastating things that are happening in the U.S., in fact, was not even a U.S. citizen. That would be remarkable. So,
one second, Bob. I'll say this. You give the administration too much credit. I don't know that they would see the absurdity in that. I don't think they would care. I don't think the administration would care whether he's a U.S. citizen or not. He's the richest person in the world by a long shot, and he's been able to run roughshod around the world for the past 10, 15 years. The fact that we know so much about him and his family and his number of children and children mothers and his way he does business, and the fact that the government has brought an individual in to say, we want you with no experience, no background in it, to come in and clean the government up, is in and of itself is absurd. But no one seems to see that or recognize that. And he's doing a bad job at it because he doesn't know what he's doing. No one seems to care about that. So the fact that he may or may not be an illegal immigrant, I don't think the government's going to care.
Well, the government might not care, but the courts may. The courts may care whether the kind of power and authority that's been vested in him by the president is lawful under U.S. law, if in fact it turns out that Musk is not a U.S. citizen. And I don't know whether he is or he isn't. I'm just telling you the information that's been available that I've been able to find. And again, I'm asking for you out there to do some investigation, help us out to come to an answer. On the issue of name, you mentioned the thing about the name change. You should know that under Hedgepeth, I guess that's his name, the Secretary of Defense, the United States is reversing all of the name changes at the U.S. military bases that occurred under the Biden administration. Under the Biden administration, many of the U.S. military bases around the country were named after Confederate generals. Biden, at the urging of Congressional Black Caucus and others, changed those names so that they didn't reward or honor the participation of those individuals who fought against the country in support of the institution of slavery. The Trump administration is reversing that policy, and he's returning those bases to the names that they previously held, where they honor these Confederate military people. So that's, in addition to that, you should know that it would appear that the Trump administration has declared war on any and every policy that would suggest that this country is in any way indebted to African American people, the descendants of slavery or otherwise. The government canceled or dismissed, I should say, a lawsuit that was about to be, where financial judgment was about to be entered against the Maryland State Police for discriminatory hiring policies, a case that had been tried in the federal court. A judgment on liability had been issued, and Judge Bennett, I think, was within days of issuing a financial award. But DOJ, as it exists under Pam Bondi, dismissed that lawsuit, and I believe they have the Department of Justice, so-called Civil Rights Division, if it still exists, has dismissed all of the cases or any other cases that were pending around the country relating to that had been brought by the government against local or state agencies for employment discrimination, and to the extent that there were consent decrees entered into at the urging of the federal government. I think that the current Justice Department is pulling back from those decrees, in the sense that they are no longer requiring the state or the local governments to abide by, to the extent that they can do so without violating court orders. So again, now you might say, well, what does all this have to do with contracting or business opportunities in Baltimore City? Well, as we've said previously, the city, like a lot of other jurisdictions in the country, receives a considerable amount of money, either directly or indirectly from the federal government. To the extent that money is used for public works contracting, it is used in connection with Baltimore City's minority business program. The city's minority business program over the last 30, 40, 50 years almost has been the primary way by which minority business has been able to obtain any share of city contracting, and not just minority business, but small business as well. And so also that the Trump administration, emboldened somewhat by the decision from the Supreme Court a couple of years ago, has taken a position that any reference to race as a basis for contract award or as a basis for any type of financial grant or assistance from the federal government is to be abolished, is to be abandoned, is to be eliminated. In fact, Trump, by executive order, has gone so far as to declare that a federal contractor who must certify that they no longer use DEI or anything else perceived as race-based as a basis for selecting subcontractors, and they must, under his executive order, if they violate that certification, they could be subject to treble damages equal to the value of the contract times 3. So now, many of the Trump orders are subject to temporary restraining orders, but the courts have blocked or stopped many of those orders. But it's like being charged in an indictment, and the indictment being unsealed. Once you've unleashed the knowledge of where the administration wants to go, the devastating effects of it are going to be felt, even if the courts at some point ultimately say it was wrong in the first place. And you know also that Trump has decided to sell certain federal buildings, at least from what I read them here. Now, if those properties are sold, those office buildings are sold where these people formerly worked, and the courts eventually say that Trump exceeded his authority by, in essence, overruling the United States Congress and the act of prior presidents, and those people are ordered to be returned. If those buildings have been sold in the interim, if the office buildings where they worked have been sold in the interim, the question will be, where would they go in any event? So all of this, this is about the board watch. We want it to be about the board watch, but unfortunately, or fortunately, depending on how you look at it, we can't really talk about Baltimore City in a vacuum. We can't talk about what's going on in the city or the opportunities in the city without talking about how those opportunities are affected by, or could be affected by, actions taken by the federal and state government. Go ahead.
I want to back up something. You've mentioned a lot of things. As far as Defense Secretary Pete Hesage, his goal has been to, in fact, change the names back, but he hasn't done that. What he does is that he's playing fast and loose and playing cute. He's finding other military veterans with the same name as the prior Confederate person, and then he changed the name to their name. So the most recent was it military base I'm reading now.
Fort Benning? Was that it?
I guess it's Fort Moore. Was the most recent one? Well, it's Fort Moore now. Was Fort Benning, but they found another. So the initial Fort Benning was named after a Confederate general who was opposed the abolition of slavery. He wanted to keep black folks in chains. He opposed the idea of equality or freedom, any of that. So in my mind, I'm not sure why in the world we would have government installation named after Confederate generals anyway, considering they lost the war. Secondly, government installations are paid for by the people. The people in Georgia, a good portion of them are black. The idea that you would have black citizenry using their taxpayer dollars to honor and award a person who's pro-slavery is outrageous. That's what went on. The reason they changed the names because the names are symbols, right? So in society, we don't only deal in actual, real, tangible thing. We deal in symbolism, and the symbolism is incredible. That if we're taking your taxpayer dollars and we're honoring someone who fought against the country and who wanted to keep your people as slaves, that tells you how much power you have, right? It tells you the kind of power you have, that you're paying for this. when they change the names to other names, there's some people in the country who are offended by it, the idea that we're erasing history. No, we're not erasing history. The names weren't named after people in real time. They were named after people years after their death to honor them. That's not history. That's a perverted history. So he's trolling basically. But it goes along the path of anything we can do to subvert the idea of diversity we want to do, right? So the reason those names were changed because people found that it was unreasonable considering we have a contingent of people in this country who are black, African American, or however you define yourself, but are descendants of slaves. The idea that you would use their taxpayer money to honor someone who wanted their destruction and enslavement is contrary to reason. That's why they were changed. They want to go back to no. We don't care what they think. We don't care how they feel about it. We do what we want to do because we want to do it. They haven't gone as far because it does go beyond the pale of you're a U.S. citizen and you're a patriot and say, hey, we wanted to go back to a Confederate because the Confederate lost the war. So, but it's in line. In terms of the budget, in terms of what Trump's mandate is and his attempts to rid the federal workforce and the contractor force that support the federal government from DEI, that goes along with their path and even selling federal buildings. They want to decrease the budget. They're finding ways to decrease the budget in ways that are surface. All the ways they want to decrease it aren't real ways to decrease the budget. We have a lot of ways to decrease the budget, decrease military spending. That does it right there. I mean, the amount of money we spend on the military is outrageous. When they say we want to decrease DEI, what they're saying is, in the ecosystem, and I'm sure many of our guests know this, in this region, this part of the country, people are highly educated and highly compensated, whether you're a federal government employee or you're a contract doing business with the federal government. This part of the country isn't like anywhere else in the country. We have federal government installations in Virginia, and we have all across the country, but not to the level we have here in this part of the country. And the reality is many people who work for the federal government and for contractors are diverse, black. And those people are making more money than the average household around the country. So if you are in Frederick, or you in Charles County, you in PG County, and you work for the federal government making $150,000 a year, you make more than double most families' income around the country. People recognize that. They don't really like it. They don't really appreciate it in a way that's helpful. If you go to West Virginia, or you go to Wyoming, or you go to Minnesota, or Idaho, or there's many places around the country, all through the Midwest, where people don't have the means to have those kind of jobs. People in the Senate and in Congress from those places have resented D.C. for quite some time because of that. And resenting D.C., which was called at one point Chocolate City, is one of the same as resenting the people who work there and look a certain kind of way. The point you made about once the president, even though he's failed in his policies and they haven't gone through the court, but once he sets his agenda, his ideas, people follow suit. The reason he's looking to get rid of race-based things, I think you're right. He wants the states to follow suit. He wants businesses to push back against government and say, no, we're not hiring black folks. The whole DEI the argument is a red herring. The argument they're having is, hey, it's unfair that you're hiring people because they're black or Asian or Hispanic. We should hire the most qualified person. When most employees will tell you they don't hire the most qualified person. Trump didn't hire the most qualified person. Most of the jobs, Hassan wasn't qualified for, I'm not sure anything, but he's hired. So the idea, there's a suit now, I think I sent you the email about that a few weeks ago, someone suing, I think it's Minnesota maybe, suing Starbucks. And they're saying because they have a DEI program where they want to hire minority candidates, because of that, they're suing them, alleging people getting their coffee slower. The premise is outrageous. and basically they're saying that people of the state have lost and suffered harm because you're hiring people who are diverse versus the best qualified person. I don't know how you find the person best qualified to give you a cup of coffee. Like we didn't talk about a surgeon who has to have all this training and background. We talk about someone, typically you hire somebody in high school to do those kind of jobs. You hire a high school student that you can train fairly well to give people coffee and take their money. But the fact that you hire and you make an effort to hire people who are diverse, they're saying, well, no, that's a harm to the community at large. Those things, it pushes the idea in the envelope to say any consideration you have for a person's background is wrong. When we know historically in this country, people from diverse backgrounds, primarily black folks, don't get hired for jobs even when they are the most qualified person.
Well, most of the DEI hires were not African Americans.
No,
most of the DEI hires, in fact, were Caucasian women. But I cannot overlook the fact that Trump has what I consider to be, and I'm not a conspiracy theorist, but I believe Trump has declared war against the black community because he saw that generally the black community did not support his candidacy for the office of president. I think that his political retribution is what emboldens Elon Musk, a South Afrikaner, to implement the heritage under which he grew up, which was apartheid. So when you see and again, so in my mind at least, there's strong likelihood that what is espoused as a desire to hire the most qualified is really simply an attack and assault against American black people, or brown people, or anybody other who's not part of their entourage. And what you have to remember, again, that government for the most part is there to protect people from the king. You know, this country, the evolution of this country, the government of this country devolved from the Great Britain, and we still honor in most places what's referred to as the common law. That's where it comes from, the Great Britain, and so one of the traditions that emerged from that history is one where the king owned everything. The king owned everything, and so whatever we got, whatever the people got, the peasants got, was only by virtue of the king's largesse. That's why we have a concept, for example, called sovereign immunity. So eventually, the people had to be protected from the king. As the people were given more and more rights, they wanted to be protected. The government was created and expanded to protect people from the king. The problem that we now have is that the king has taken control of the government, and the people are left without any protection whatsoever, and we're left to the goodwill, if any, of, as I said, Elon Musk and the Musketeers. And what's interesting is, since his policies affect people across the board, black and white, he's getting a lot of pushback from people in so-called red states, Republican states. And apparently, I read the other day, a few days ago, in speaking with Congress, he told some of the friendlies, that, just to give me a buzz, and I'll see what I can do to get your money back. So apparently, it is the policy now is, if we're going to get everybody, as my grandmother would say, we're going to beat everybody, make sure we get the right one. But then if we catch some that we didn't want to, if we hurt some that we didn't want to hurt, you have a private line to the White House, so to speak, to get some level of restoration of your finances or other benefits that were taken away in the sweep. So, but again, this is not a civics class necessarily, but we cannot talk about Baltimore City and how to do business in Baltimore City and the likelihood of success in doing business with Baltimore City without talking about how the city is affected by these other measures. What would you say, Hassan, to someone, small business, minority business that had been relying upon the city's expansion of opportunities that was funded by the federal government money as financial assistance, where that assistance may now be cut off because some part of the program was race-based?
So first, I want to jump back because you made a good point. I wanted to say, Speaker of the House Johnson, recently, I think he gave a press conference. He was telling Republicans stop doing town halls because at town halls in their own district, people are pissed off because when people lose jobs, I mean, when you're Trump and you're Musk, you're a billionaire, you have all this money. Most folks are trying to work to take care of their family. The idea that mom and dad come home and they don't have a job anymore because someone in DC is playing games, it don't sit too well with people.
Right.
It doesn't matter what race you are. People are never happy about it. When you know you can't pay bills and you can't pay food on the table, that's a problem. So that part I thought was interesting. So in terms of people who are watching the show and are trying to find some insight on the voter estimates in Baltimore, or any procurement in general, and you're basing your work and your attempts and your applications on any race-based preference, such as whether you're a woman, or not only race-based, but minority-based, whether you're a woman-owned business, whether you're a minority-owned business, whether you're Hispanic, Black, Asian, Latino, as the case may be, you have to reconsider how you make your requests. There's a clear pushback against anything identifying race. So we know this country has a history for Black Americans primarily. The other ethnicities have different situations, but historically we have a history of Black Americans not getting their fair due and being kept out of commerce and being kept out of society in a real way, where they weren't able to access all kind of financial resources. And when they weren't able to access it, they were taken from them. So as a result, there's always been a lag in the Black community. We've always had less. So in terms of Black businesses, they typically don't have the actual capital to compete with their larger non-Black counterparts for generations of legalized efforts by the U.S. government. If you're using your ethnicity or your race as a basis for you to obtain contract, you got to find another way. The administration is being very adverse. Whereas in Maryland is trying to be a pushback and trying to be a counter. I don't know how long that will last. You made a point earlier. It's not about whether the law will change in the state. It's about the sentiment. The sentiment Trump is putting out there, and they started off with affirmative action in schools, and they say, hey, if you're Black and you go to school, you don't belong here because you only got affirmative action, even though most of the Black students didn't go there for affirmative action, even though majority of students who got in were worse grades than them. I mean, you go to the bigger schools like Harvard, Yale, Princeton, Stanford, who have legacy, they have way more legacy who gets to get in than affirmative action. There were no lawsuits for that. Because the legacy people don't look like you and I. You have to be able to find another way to go after business and be more creative. The reality is, in the Black community, I speak mainly for Black community, not for, but about the Black community because I'm Black. I know that like the back of my hand. I don't need degrees to know Black life. I was raised in Black life. I do understand some of the things that goes on in other communities as well, whether it's women, whether it's Asian, whether it's Hispanics, but my home and my heart is with the Black community, so I know it. My mom is Black, daddy's Black, uncle's cousin, everybody's Black, so I know my cousin came out of job. I know when I had relatives who went to jail and came out and couldn't find work, he was working, doing all kind of, like, I know the story. I have the experience. It's lived experience for me. But there's always been a pushback on those race-based programs because white, bigger businesses come in and say, hey, it doesn't make sense you're giving them these. And my issue isn't so much that people are from different ethnicities, from outside the community. So we have people coming from New York and Virginia, and they say, we want to do business in Baltimore. We're not from the community. We want taxpayers' money. We want to fund our business with your taxpayers' dollars, and we don't like how you're doing things in your own state. Or you're giving diverse grants. Why are you doing that? It's not right. It's biased that you do that. Well, hold up. The people of this state voted for their officials, and they elected these laws into place, and they're the ones who are based on the history of the state. And you come in and say, no, you don't want that. You're forcing or trying to force things to change. You have to find another way. It had to be other ways where you can grow. I would suggest, and we haven't been able to do this in any real way, is coalitions working together in a bigger, a more elaborate way. The reality is when you're a small business, the reason you need support is because you don't have the revenue, the money, the manpower to do on a larger level, and for all kinds of reasons. We would have to find a way to come together and do collaborations. Companies got to work together and figure things out, because the reality is if Trump administration get their wish and there's no more consideration for race-based, including like MBE or WBE, the Black community is going to suffer. You're going to see companies come in from other parts of the other country who have all the resources because they had them historically, and they're going to get all the jobs and all the grants, and they won't hire people locally. They will bring people from out of town. Business still now. They travel the country. They bring their own people in. Mm-hmm. They bring them in from Virginia. They bring them in from Georgia and the Carolinas. So you're going to literally have situations where in liberal cities, they're going to have people coming in from other places doing the work and supplanting the people who live locally. If you can't build a business and hire people locally, because of their racial background, then you're screwed. There's nothing you can do. And once that happens, it's a cycle. It's a tumbling effect. Once you prevent businesses from getting grants or getting minority-based projects, they don't have the ability to get other projects. That's why you don't have the minority ones in the first place. Then they won't hire the people they hire, and people they hire typically are local people. They may not be Black. They hire people who are local. They could be Black, Hispanic, or white, but they hire local. And they hire local much more likely than the out-of-state companies will. So you have both a loss in businesses and business revenue, and you have a loss of revenue for people who are employees for those businesses, and they won't be able to compete in any real way. And you'll see a trickle down from that.
Are you suggesting that in place of, or in addition to, for so long as it continues, programs where the preference is race-based, that we might see the development of programs that are not race-based, but based upon the employment. In other words, where a preference is given to those companies who currently not just promise to employ people from the community, let's say, but who have a workforce that is already reflects a commitment to hire people and to afford a preference to those companies, black or white,
Yeah.
that provide that kind of a commitment to local residents. Are you suggesting that we may see more of that type of response from the government?
We should see it from government. I'm not sure the government is on the same wavelength, so I don't know if the government will see it the same way. I do think it's important, and the reason we have certainly places like Baltimore, which is predominantly black city, and in Maryland, which has a large black population, the reason we have things in place for a minority because we have local people who can't find jobs, and we know historically when you have the hiring manager being diverse, they hire diverse candidates across the board. We talk about most qualified. That hasn't been, all the studies haven't shown that. The studies have shown the more diverse the workforce is, the more diverse the workforce is. So when you have a manager or owner who's black, guess what? He don't mind hiring black folks. Mm-hmm. Surprise. That's how it works. And if you're in a place like Maryland and locally have a large black population, which means you have diverse candidates working. Not because we want to give people a payback for slavery. They got to work and they need jobs, and it's jobs to be done, and they can do the work. Why wouldn't you hire your local base? We do. One thing we do in my practice, and we've been doing for years, is helping. It's called community development, but we do it for our businesses. We try to find ways to help them grow and develop. And the government tries that through community economic development. They have all these CDCs around. They try to find all kinds of ways to give money to the community. The basic thing for all of them is putting money in people's pockets, which means get somebody to work. That's it. It's programs. If they do a program in inner city Baltimore, East Baltimore, say we want to get GED program, they work programs. They don't call it that. It don't seem like that. That's what it is. We're gonna hire people to get you your GED. So what? Know what? You can get a job. We can give people a job, help you learn how to get a job. All those work programs. They have to be. Mm-hmm. The only way we see development communities is if money's coming in. Now, certainly, people don't have to be overly capitalistic. But we need money to live, and all things operate through revenue coming in. We know in Baltimore, and people out there who watch this who aren't local, Baltimore is a city of communities, small neighborhoods. Well, depending on the kind of money coming in neighborhoods, it changes the neighborhood distinctively. If you in Roland Park is different than being in Greenmount. I mean, it's different. It's different than being a homeland. I mean, the neighborhood, based on the money that comes in the neighborhood, changes how it looks, who lives there, the kind of houses are there, the resources you have. All that is affected. So all the programs that we have are based and geared towards employment, but I don't think politicians see it the way I think they see it in a much more basic way. Hey, we have poor people living over here. How about we give them some GED programs and some programs to get food? Or we have people over here doing this. We need to get some aftercare program for students. We got kids out there in their truancy. How about we give the after school program and they can play basketball? They see more immediate things. The reality is all the things that work in communities, urban or suburban or rural, are job programs, things that are going to lead to a person getting a job directly. So any kind of program where the government put things in place to say, hey, if you hire local, we'll give you contracts. 100% will go towards helping my community, because hiring local means hiring people in Baltimore. Not everyone in Baltimore isn't black. So Baltimore is a very diverse city. But if you have a mandate to hire people locally, you can't help but hit somebody who's black. It makes sense. And it's a situation where it's not race-based. It's opportunity-based. Hey, we need people to work. We have a population of people in the community. If they work, they support the community. One, they can become homeowners. They can buy homes, which increase tax base. It all goes in a very easy formula. I don't know if politicians see it that way.
And of course, it depends upon not just providing any kind of jobs, but it requires that the jobs provide sufficient benefits, wages and benefits so that you can support your family. I think everyone would agree that the devastation of the family is equivalent to the devastation of the community at large. The family is the first and foremost institution of civilization, and if you can't support, what I mean is that if the only jobs available are and pay the type of wages where you have to have 2 or 3 of those kinds of jobs to support the family, so that so that the adults in the household really cannot function as adults, and the unit cannot function as a family because they hardly see each other. The kids, because it's a revolving door. Mama's coming in, daddy's going to work, man's coming in, woman's going to work, kids are out in the street until somebody comes home to tell them to come in the house. So there have to be jobs that provide sufficient income so that on a regular 40-hour week basis, people can support their families. Now, the pushback from the so-called business community is that will increase the prices, the cost of doing business. And so to the point where people can't pay for the goods or services. Well, of course, if people are earning more money, they can pay for goods or services. And perhaps there needs to be also some sort of price regulation along with this. That was successful during the years of Reagan and elsewhere. Rent control in New York City is still in place, although the Trump family and others found ways over the years to avoid it and evade it. But nevertheless, both income and price control have proven to be necessary ingredients to achieving family financial stability and so that the families can function. So what should the citizens of Baltimore be urging the city council and the mayor to do in anticipation of what we now believe is going to be the long-term economic effects of the Trump administration?
I think the point you made is right on. You hit the nail on the head with finding some other kind of ways to ensure that we add additional factors on giving government contracts, whether it's a state contract or a city contract or a county contract. It should be local first. It should be a preference for businesses that have locally hired employees. And I think you're right, having local employees before you apply. A history of hiring people local. Because, right. I mean, what could happen is someone can come in in the night and say, I'm hiring you, get the contract and fire all y'all.
Right.
And keep going. I mean, look, we know how business works.
Right.
But if you have companies, even if they're out-of-state companies who are committed to working locally, it helps the community in all kinds of ways where it ensures employment in our community. So, yes, I'm all for the state as well as localities, cities around the state having rules in place on top of the MBE requirement of having a set aside or a preference for companies that hire local and have hired local at least a year or two prior to their application to any. Because again, it's government money, it's taxpayer money. Yeah. The idea that we're spending money as taxpayers, it should be spent for the development of our community. I don't care whether it means development of schools, roads, buildings, but it should be development of our community. But that also, to me, means people and families. Right. Things are getting more expensive. There are people out there, so billionaires they don't have to look at their bank account when they go to the market. Regular folks do. Right. If you can't buy eggs, it's a problem. People in the market trying to figure out if they can feed their kids eggs or cereal, and cereal is cheaper. That's a better option. We have to have a situation where people actually can work and take care of their family. If not, you're going to see things decrease from what it is now. You're going to see anarchy. When people can't feed their families, all shit go loose. All hell goes loose. Because what are you going to do? Right. What are you going to do? Right. If you're a woman or a man, you got kids at home, and you can't feed them. Right. What are you going to do? Right. You can't find employment. What are you going to do? All the benefits the government is giving that you pay tax into going out the door, what are you going to do? It has to be some kind of mechanism. But again, that relies on government officials, city council people, state delegates, state legislature. They have a different approach to how we decide to fund our communities and how we make sure money stays in the community. It's not only a one deal shot. Whereas what we have to have, and I'll say this. We have preferences in government now where we say, hey, we want to give diverse candidates, whether they MBE or WBE, businesses deals. The reality is we see more and more often non-local companies are coming in and getting those deals and getting waivers. So even though we have a preference in the law to support minority-owned businesses, they don't get all those businesses, and the government knows they don't get them. They openly give waivers to companies, and typically companies outside the state. Normally it's not a local company getting those waivers. It's out of state companies getting the waivers. So they're literally coming in. They're not hiring diverse candidates. They're hiring their own people, and they're pulling state money out. They're pulling taxpayer money out of the locality and using it for their own growth and development in their community. And that's contrary to the purpose of those preferences, and it's contrary to what the people of the state of Maryland want for their for their dollars.
Well, it seems to me that we've got to rethink this notion of of achieving a societal good versus correction or providing a remedy for a legal wrong. It seems to me that
It's our conversation, Bob.
that Chief Justice Roberts in the Harvard case a couple of years ago was saying exactly that. We can we're no longer permitted to use race as where the goal is simply to achieve some sort of societal good that's unquantified, unquantifiable, has no objective beginning or ending point. Now we know that now the alternative, the legal basis for, at least as for American blacks is concerned, and I distinguish American blacks from other black folk who've come to this country subsequently, but the Constitution under the Fifth Amendment and the Maryland Declaration of Rights says that two things are necessary as it relates to the individuals. One, with taking property from an individual. One, there's got to be due process, and two, there's got to be just compensation. So what happened to this idea that the country and or the state, not for the purpose of achieving some societal good, not for the purpose of establishing some moral principle, but for the purpose of providing a legal compensation for the property rights, both tangible and intangible, taken from American blacks during the period, before, during, and after the period of slavery. What about that as a legal basis for programs where race is a factor?
So for people out there who listen to the conversation and may think it's kind of high level, so societal good means, hey, it's better for us to support our black brothers and sisters than to keep them in a situation where financially they're not doing well. It's a good in society that we equalize and normalize having black folks in the workforce. Now, in places like Baltimore, that may sound crazy considering it's a predominantly black city, but most of the country, black folks are a minority. I think nationally we're 30% of the population, and as far as the workforce, we're much, much lower. Even when we qualify and able, we don't get jobs at the same level as our non-black counterparts. So societal good is we need to put things in place so that those prejudices don't prevent people who may be black from obtaining employment and or going to college. And that's why we see affirmative action. We see all kinds of programs in education, upper level education, college and universities put all kinds of things in place to bring black students. Another thing, because historically they have gotten less, and historically their schools haven't been on par with their white counterparts. So even if you're the best student in a black school, I'm a local Baltimorean. I went to Southern High School. When I was in high school, that wasn't a very good high school. I don't care if you left there at the top of your class, you weren't compared to your candidates at other schools. It wasn't a thing. And that was a typical school at the time when I went to school back in the 90s. That was a typical school. Southern was an average school in Baltimore City. It wasn't a very good school. My colleagues from other places in the country who were predominantly white had much, much better academic performance because they had much better schools. So we applied for the same school, and we both had 4.0 GPAs. Schools will take them, not me. You know why? Because my 4.0 GPA didn't mean the same thing. So the reason you have affirmative action in university, because they recognize, hey, you could be a genius and go to Southern and still don't know nothing because you went to Southern. It's not an indicator as to how intelligent you are, your ability to go through the process, but we do know we don't rank that school as high because you don't do as much. So when you have that situation, it's a 2 or 3 tier approach where all these people are down here and they have no way to compete because they were never given the opportunity. So societal good is a reasonable thing, but it's amorphous.
You know, it's interesting to talk about Southern and your time there in Baltimore City. I went to high school a few years before you on the Eastern Shore, a small town called Salisbury, and I went to school before so-called integration. And our elementary, middle, we didn't have middle school then. It went from elementary to junior high and high school was all black, and not and all black necessarily because we weren't admitted to go. But many of the people who are now heralded within our community came from my background, came through school at a time from school systems where they were all black. The differences is from Salisbury High School to Southern High School. is in not so much in the dollars that were put into the institution, but it was in the expectations and the commitment and the belief of the teachers and the people who managed that facility. That it was not necessarily the case that you got a substandard education from Southern High School or Salisbury High School. It depended on how the level of expectation that the teachers had, the level of commitment. Now, the difference is when I went to school, the teachers lived next door. They shopped in the same market with my grandmother. They went to the same church.
I'll say this.
Go
The
ahead.
point you're making is a good point. I would say to that, you and I may be anomalies. I went to Southern, you went to a small school in Salisbury. Most of the people I went to school with aren't lawyers. They're not doctors, they're not accountants, they're not
Right.
CPAs. And I
Right.
suggest the same applies to the school you went to as well. The reality is the school you go to isn't indicative of your intellect. You have ability to do all kinds of things. And just because you're black, that means you're less than, or your grades aren't as good, or you're not as smart. That's not the case, and no one believes that. Hence, most universities will bring people in from all kinds of backgrounds because they know. But it's not only black school. You go to West Virginia and you're a white person, your school may not be the best. And the university may say, no, what, you got 3.5 at this school. Nah, that really isn't a great school, but we'll take you anyway because we think you can do the work here, even though academically you're not on par with a bunch of other students. That's the social good. So we do that, and I think society allows that. I think most people in society think it's reasonable. It doesn't matter your race, black, white, Asian, Hispanic. They typically assume if you're in West Virginia and your school isn't that great, but you do okay, why can't you go to UC Berkeley? You shouldn't have to be a genius to go to UC Berkeley from West Virginia or Baltimore City for that matter. A qualified legal basis means, in my mind, reparations. When you're saying qualified legal basis, he's saying, hey, we have a framework and we know what the losses were. And we can identify them and quantify them. How about we have a legal framework? The reality is every administration has been not willing to go that far. We had the first black president; he was going nowhere near. He didn't think it was reasonable. So the idea of reparations, people have anything that comes. My view is when it comes to blacks in this country, it changes the meaning of things. Affirmative action isn't a bad thing, but when you say it about black folks, give the impression we get something we don't deserve. DEI isn't a bad thing, but now they use it to mean black folks when it really doesn't mean that. You mean diversity, equity, and inclusion. That could be all kind of people. Reparations aren't a bad thing, but it's seen as some kind of a free lunch for black folks. As if black folks didn't build the country. It seemed like a free lunch, like we're giving them something they'll deserve and that they shouldn't have. So most administrations historically have been adverse to it. And you may have some localities be okay for it. Or I think California, there was arguing for reparations. I know in Georgetown, they had a situation where they went through the rolls and they found out basically the school was built on back of black slaves, and they was willing to give free tuition for relatives of those slaves who they can find now. And those examples of reparations. Reparations aren't that hard to figure out. Like, we know who the slaves were. We know where their descendants are now. And we know, we can calculate. Look, we can send someone to the moon. We can calculate numbers. Like, the number part isn't the hard part for us. It's the will. And people feel like there's somebody getting a free lunch. If you give them something, it's unreasonable. Blacks in this country typically have a longer lineage in this country than most other Americans. Many of the Americans from Europe came in during the Great Depression, or after the Great Depression. Well, black folks are already here. They already been here. Many other minorities have come here, whether Asian, whether Hispanic, whether African. They've come here much more recent. So their view of the world has no historic context. And necessarily so, they don't care about the history of this country. They don't care about the past ills of the country. And they don't care about the continuation of those ills in this country. So to them, it's not reasonable to give a population of people anything that they're not getting as well. And we haven't been able to communicate that in any real way.
Yeah, I don't know of an example. Maybe you do, or maybe our viewers can help me, but I don't know of an example of an immigrant from an African country, a black immigrant from an African country, being given $600 million by the federal government so that they could take a electric sports car that wouldn't sell and convert it to a sedan and become the richest man in the world.
So that,
I mean, I don't know of an example of that. Who giving it to a man who, by the way, at the time when he was apparently an illegal alien and may still be an illegal alien, I don't know of an example of an African or Black American immigrant to whom this country has provided that type, and that didn't come from a Republican, by the way. That came from a Black president, Barack Obama, and so you're right. Even when Black people apparently are in positions of authority to do things, none have yet been willing to acknowledge in a legal way or draw a line in the sand and stand on the principle of just compensation for the taking, the governmental taking or governmental sponsored taking or governmental approved taking of the individual's property without just compensation and certainly without due process. And that's where we are, in my opinion, as a nation and as a world. And this is a question, by the way, that's emanate from here, but is spread all around the world. I mean, Elon Musk and his musketeers are all around the world promoting right wing or white supremacists. They support. Recently, 3 weeks ago, in the election in Germany, he supported what is the modern day equivalent of the Nazi Party that came in second place in terms of the number of votes that they got. He's done it in other parts of the country. He's heavily involved already. You mentioned about minerals in Ukraine. Well, Starlink, Musk is one of SpaceX companies that's owned by Musk, is the exclusive internet provider to Ukraine. And Ukraine, one of the minerals that Ukraine has is lithium. And guess what? You need lithium to make batteries. And guess what batteries are used for? In electric vehicles like Tesla. So maybe the answers are out there. Maybe the dots are there. We just got to connect the dots about why. But it would be the height of lunacy if it turns out that this country has turned over backwards to provide support for someone who supports apartheid, an illegal alien, and financed in part by tax money, a significant portion of which came from African Americans.
Well, again, that goes back to the name of the bases of the Confederate generals. Like, we have a history of doing things that are taking taxpayers' money, and we take taxpayers' money and give to other countries who have more support for their people than we have here. So, like, the government they don't see hypocrisy. That's not a thing the government understands. Yeah. So I'll say this, and so in terms of the just compensation, I think the issue falls with just and what people think is just. People want to walk away from, and we have it in the Jewish community where they say, never again. We don't have the same thing in the Black community. We don't talk about it the same kind of way. The reality is people don't care about slavery in any kind of real way. They don't care about Jim Crow in any kind of real way. About the historic repercussions of what those things did. They don't care about the war on drugs in any kind of real way. They don't care about all the Black Wall Street that was destroyed by the government in any kind of real way. There's been a consistent and constant effort to diminish and abuse, whether it's consciously or just by happenstance, blacks in this country. That doesn't end on African Americans. Certainly, our brothers in the African and Caribbean, while they see it different, but Africa has been totally usurped by Western powers and now by Chinese powers. And they do it in a way where they literally take out of the country, whether they took human bodies as slaves or they're taking minerals from the country, diamonds and gold and all the other cobalt. And the people there are impoverished. Africa, as a continent, is probably the wealthiest land mass that we have on the planet, and the people there have been living in poverty since our entire lifetime now, and for generations of lifetimes, and nothing's changed for that. I would say to this, and this is board watching. Our goal here is to give you guys some background. And every meeting, every show won't be about national politics. The goal is to talk about business and how you can go after business in Baltimore or the state or federal government. I would suggest and submit to you guys that we got to work on finding better ways to go after our resources, such as government contracts, whether it means by basing your diversity, basing your past performance, but we have to find better ways. The government gives money away. They give money away, whether in Ukraine, whether it's USAID, whether it's anywhere. They give billions and billions of dollars away, and people here locally or small businesses can barely have enough money to pay their payroll. We got to find a better way to go after it. So our goal, and we will continue to push and find different ideas on how do we help you be able to access contracts and access resources. It could be calling your congressperson saying, hey, we need money in this community for this. What are you doing? or maybe changing, having people change the rules on how they issue contracts. But all those things are in the air because, as you see, as my co-host here is lamented about our ability to give Elon Musk, a foreign national from South Africa, all the money he needed to build his empire. We can do it for our own people as well.
Well, I'm going to leave you with the question of, and please help me here, do some investigation. Is Elon Musk a lawful U.S. citizen, or does he remain, or is he still an illegal alien? Next week, we're going to talk about the governor's supplemental budget and his efforts to cover the gap in Maryland's funding, and how that decision or that budget may impact Baltimore City and ultimately the contracts that come before the Board of Estimates for award. And we'll be talking about the board's agenda next week as well on the next version of the Board Watch. Until then, see you and be safe.
Take care, guys.